Hey everybody, welcome back to our final unit in reinforcement. This time we're talking about the Premack. So the Premack principle, also sometimes called like the grandma rule or the grandma principle, this is the idea that more probable behaviors will reinforce less probable or more infrequent behaviors. So things that you like to do can be used as reinforcers for things that you do not like to do or things that you are unlikely to do. Right, the idea that if you finish your chores, you can have more bread, or you can have dessert if you eat all of your broccoli, that sort of thing, right? That's why they call it the grandma rule, that sort of intuitive way of getting someone who's difficult to do something that they don't want to do with the promise of letting them do something that they... On the other side of this, less probable or infrequent behaviors do not motivate. They can actually be used to punish more probable behaviors. So, for example, we can use this Pre-Mech principle in a punishment standpoint. If you don't finish your classwork, you have to get up early tomorrow to do yard work. So you don't want to do your classwork, but you really don't want to get up early and do yard work. So you'll be motivated to do this thing because you want to do that more than you want to do this really improbable thing of getting up early to do your yard work. Okay, so let's look at our hypothetical quarantine response hierarchy, right? Let's say, just sort of abstracted, there's 10 things, 10 competing behaviors that you wish to operate on, right? From likely to very unlikely. So you may be very likely to binge Netflix or play video games or maybe eat something. Somewhere in the middle, you might be interested in participating in a Zoom happy hour or trying to bake bread, really get that sourdough right. There are things that are less probable, like reading for fun or doing your classwork or doing your chores. So at any given moment, if you're completely free to act and do whatever you want, you're very likely to do things that are on this end of the hierarchy. These are likely behaviors, whereas down here are unlikely behaviors. So how can we use the Premack principle to motivate ourselves? Well, you can make a deal, right? And say if I do this, then later I can do that. So let's say, right now, if I do some chores, right, if I wash the dishes, then later I'll binge some Netflix, right? So you make a little deal, you engage in an unprobable behavior in exchange for being able to engage in a probable behavior. If you're doing this yourself, of course, it requires some discipline, right? You have to be able to stick to the contracts that you make for yourself. If you know that you're gonna binge Netflix anyway, whether or not you do the chores, it's not really good motivators. So you have to be consistent. And as we talked about earlier, the idea of motivating operations and individual differences comes into play here, right? So let's say, for example, you've been really sedentary. You've been sitting around a lot and not really doing, not doing a ton or not doing a lot of activity. In that instance, something that's normally not very motivating can become very motivating, right? You haven't exercised in a while and you feel sluggish, so you really feel like you got to get out there and go for a run. So you're motivated to exercise. Well, normally it's pretty low in your response hierarchy. Today, it's pretty high. So you can actually structure that in and say, well, if I do my homework, then I'll go for a run afterwards. Because, and in this particular instance, exercise is something you really want to do, so it's actually higher on your response hierarchy. So it's not a static thing, right? It can change based on what's going on. Okay, that's the Premack principle, and that wraps up our discussion of reinforcement for now. We're going to talk about this stuff, especially the reinforcement schedules, in our lab class when you've gone through the lab activity applying all of those schedules to Sniffy. So we're going to hit all this again. Reinforcement's not going to go away. It's very important in this course. Okay, that's it for this time. I will see you all next time.